Maureen had formally filed for divorce after 22 years of marriage, charging extreme mental cruelty and gross neglect. Collier had finally found out what had happened to his mother. What was the atmosphere of the trial?
It was a circus. I remember going to the courthouse and seeing the news trucks outside the courthouse with the towers on the news trucks and everything. I had never seen any of that. Just even driving into the courthouse, the tons of people that were there.
Testimony continued today in the most notorious criminal trial in Richland County history. Dr. John Boyle is accused of killing his wife Maureen and burying her body in the basement of his new home in Erie, Pennsylvania. The motive, prosecutors say, so he could move into that house with younger girlfriend Sherry Campbell, who was carrying his baby.
It's actually better than a soap opera because it happened right in our own town. It's just like a movie.
The trial shook the close community of Mansfield. This incredibly well-known doctor had been accused of murder. Police estimated that 1 in every 13 residents of Mansfield had been under his care. Collier made the decision to testify against his father, but it wasn't a decision his family could accept.
My father's side of the family rejected me because they said that I got my father arrested, that I was making the whole thing up, and they wanted me to renounce what I had told the police and everything. My mother's side, they told me verbatim, we will not take you in because you look like your father. I was my own devices and left to just go into the law education system, which I did with my sister. It was awful. Yeah, it sucked.
Collier was kept pretty isolated in foster care. Investigators didn't want to risk it looking as though they were pressuring him to testify, so his contact with David Massimo was cut off. When I pushed Collier on how he kept himself going, what gave him comfort, he tells me about the time his grandmother died, his mom's mom.
I remember my mother telling me, Collier, you need to be strong for Papa, try not to cry. And I just remember utilizing those same sort of words, and her just telling me to be strong and to be like a little man, like a little soldier. And I think that was the thing, is I needed to be strong for my mother. And I needed to be strong for myself because I knew there are certain choices that are laid out in front of you in life that you know will affect the rest of your life. You don't want to have any regrets. And for me, that was that moment that I was going to testify, because the prosecution was like, you don't have to testify against your father. And I said, that's like over my dead body. Like, I'm going to do this because I wanted to make sure that he was convicted, because I knew what the truth was.
And do you remember taking the stand for the first time?
Yeah, I do. But I remember just walking out there, and it was just surreal. It's like you were floating.
Collier Henry Boyle.
Can you tell us how old you are now?
I'm 12 years old.
You said you went to bed about 9 o'clock on December 30th.
Mm-hmm.
Did anything happen in the course of that night that woke you up?
I heard a scream coming from my sister. The immediate thought I had was something was wrong with my mother.
It was this moment to say to the judge and the jury, this is what happened, and this is the man who forever altered the course of my mother's life, my life.
And then a little while later, maybe about 3 minutes, maybe, I heard a thud. Little.
Okay, could you describe this sound for us?
Okay, it was about this loud. And then I heard a thud like this, just even louder. And at that time, I was petrified. I mean, I was just scared.
All right, now, did you get up at that time to investigate what had happened?
No, I did not.
And could you tell the jury why you didn't?
Because I was extremely afraid of my father. I always have.
He wouldn't look at me the whole time, for 2 days. He wouldn't look at me. I would stare right at him just to say, we're not going to get away with this.
And so I went downstairs and I said, where's my mother? To my father, and he said, well, Mommy took a little vacation, Collier. And then I didn't know what to say. I just panicked.
Collier's father, John Boyle, was convicted of aggravated murder, also called first-degree murder in some states. There's no suggestion that Sherry had any role in the murder. The jury found it was premeditated, planned, and carried out by John Boyle with intent.
This is Channel 6 News.
Good evening, everyone. This was the moment of truth in Mansfield today.
Do you remember the day of the verdict?
I do. I was playing tennis, and I remember everyone in the tennis club being huddled around the television, and then they took me into a separate room. I got on the phone with Dave Messmore, and that was something that was really kind of somber and surreal moment in my life. Nobody wants to say that about their father. Their father murdered their mother, and then did it in such a heinous and horrific way of premeditating, taking me to buy the burial shroud that he wraps her in, planning all of this. It's so psychopathic and callous and cold.
The tarp that Collier's dad had bought with him at Kmart was what Noreen's body was found wrapped in. The carpeting that had stood on the back porch of their Mansfield home was used to cover the fresh on the basement floor. Collier had testified about all of these details. This wasn't a day to celebrate, but it was a day of reckoning, and it meant that Collier could at least try to move forward. After the trial, you still kept in touch with the Messmores. How important was that relationship for you? This one police officer who believed in you, who believed you, helped solve your mother's murder.
Massive relief just to go over there and hang out with their older kids and throw the football and ride a bike and just be a normal kid was so amazing in that summer after the trial. And it was only for a couple months that I got to see them, but I was able to feel like a kid and to be able to have a sort of sense of normalcy. Sort of got to play like I had a movie with mom and dad, where there might be a happy ending.
Ultimately, Collier and his little sister were separated, and while the Messmores did want to adopt him, the judge decided that he should try to make a fresh start with another local family. Collier was heartbroken, but his new parents were kind and utterly devoted to him, although no one was really prepared for the level of celebrity that had come with the case.
We couldn't go anywhere without people knowing who I was, and they were kind of private people. They most certainly weren't used to having people stare at them at restaurants. Everyone knew me. They'd seen me on television, they knew about the trial. That put a lot of strain on our relationship growing up, but we got through it, and we have a wonderful relationship now, and they were wonderful, and things ended up the way that it should be.
Collier was given stability, a safe, loving home, and he thrived as he made his way through high school. He had jobs, was class president, he was even a choir star. Eventually, he left town and moved far away to Los Angeles, where he started to find work in the film industry. He changed his name from Collier Landry Boyle to Collier Landry, but he could never really leave it all behind. John Boyle had never admitted to murdering Noreen. The question of why his father would do this to his mother when he already had a new family, when he was winning the divorce, haunted Collier throughout his adult life. And so, with an Oscar-winning director on board, he went back to Mansfield to make a documentary about it all, Murder in Mansfield. It would be his chance to finally ask why.
I was almost obsessed with finding out that reason. I had a relationship with my father for 27 years before that film. I always knew every time I'd see him, one day, I'm going to sit down right here with cameras and ask you that question, and you're going to be forced to answer it.
I know what happened now because I spent yesterday at the police department looking at files and photos of Mommy's lifeless body, the back of her skull smashed in. These are things that I didn't know. So I need you to tell me the truth for once. Can you do that?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
That is the first time I've ever said that to that man. And obviously you see that he's not capable.
So what happened?
I came home. My intentions were not to kill her or do anything else to her. But then she picked up a knife, and she came at me with that knife. I pushed her, and she hit her head against that wooden table. Tried CPR on her. Didn't work. She was lifeless. She was dead. I panicked. I didn't know what to do.
How did she get a plastic bag over her head?
I put the plastic bag over her head. I put it over her head because I was just afraid to look at her, scared to look at her.
Not to suffocate.
Not to suffocate her, no, not at all.
I don't believe you. He's telling me this story after story. It's just nonsensical. When I finished that conversation with my father, I realized I will never be that man that my father is. And that was the biggest relief. Just reassurance that I'm a good person and that I don't have it in me to be that person.
Something else came from the film too. Collier has had distant relatives get in touch, people who knew his family back before all this happened.
I went to see my cousins and then their mom, who had known my mother. And I got out of the Uber and she just like broke down and she's like, she's like, you were exactly like your mother. She made everyone feel so good. Her smile just lit up a room. She had this way of engaging with people, making everybody feel welcome. And you have the same exact energy your mother had. And it's things like that that I never expected would ever come to light. So when I hear that stuff, it makes me so happy to know that even though I didn't know my mother in that light, that I radiate.
My thanks to Collier Landry. His film is called The Murder in Mansfield. Please email us on outlook@bbc.com if you have any feedback or stories you want to share with us. I'm Aussie Fuchs. Producer was Helen Fitzhenry. Till next time. Care.
BBC World Service, and now witness history with me, Johnny Ayanson. We're going back to the formation of a pioneering heavy metal band in Baghdad, Iraq, whose determination to keep playing despite conflict would set them on a collision course with dictatorship, militants, and the West.
Jet fighters have swooped low over the capital as air silence are blasted through the still dawn air.
You know, there's all kind of insurgents, militias, armies, you name it. Everybody has a gun at that point, and it's absolute chaos.
On Tuesday night, I gave the order for British forces to take part in military in Iraq.
We normalized with that idea of, like, I could be dead now, later, you know, if I die, I die. I mean, it is what it is.
This looks as if it's the night when the war will hit Baghdad hard.
Firas Al-Latif is the bass player in Akrasa Kauda, widely regarded as the first ever heavy metal band to come out of Iraq, who burst onto the scene in 1999. More accurately, they're a thrash metal band, a more aggressive, high-tempo version. It's a style of music which, perhaps unsurprisingly in the 90s, when Firas was growing up, wasn't exactly common in Iraq.
Actually, I got interested in music throughout my family. My older brother and sister, they used to, you know, like listen to the 70s, 80s music, but metal was not a thing. So basically I started learning guitar, and as I was learning the guitar, I started getting deeper into, you know, hard rock and metal and all that stuff. From there, you know, like start branching, so I got introduced to Black Sabbath, Metallica, Overkill, you know, you name it, all the big bands.
The air raid began at breakfast time in Baghdad. 3 American-built Iranian Phantom jets began their attack on the city.
Iraq has been ravaged by conflict and insurgency over the last century, including the 8-year Iran-Iraq War, which began in 1980. Firas says despite this, Baghdad was still a vibrant city.
Generally speaking, Baghdad was just like any other place in the world, culturally open. It was very advanced in technology, science, you name it, we had it. I think during the 80s, Baghdad was the pinnacle of the Middle East, like where everybody wants to go, where everybody wants to be.
As the war ended in 1988, the country only had a 2-year respite before another era-defining conflict.
Further air attacks are underway on the second night of Desert Storm.
These precision weapons of the 21st century carry conventional warheads.
Baghdad was lit up like a Christmas tree.
In August 1990, Iraqi forces invaded Kuwait, leading to the Gulf War. It resulted in huge casualties and 13 years of crippling sanctions. Getting anything into or out of the country was almost impossible, including records.
So we couldn't even import cassettes. I listened to it get tired of it, and then you take it to the shop and they'll wipe it and re-record on top of that material. I go tell my bandmate, hey, I just got a new CD, it has such song, such song, such song. Be like, hey, I've never heard this song. I'm like, yeah, dude, it's new, came out 5 years ago. You know, so.
In 1999, Firas and his friend Tony were taking guitar lessons in a music shop in Baghdad. It was there they were introduced to three musicians who would form the rest of Akrasa Kauda: vocalist Waleed, drummer Marwan, and guitarist Faisal. Soon they were gigging around Baghdad, but dictatorships aren't classic conditions for music which is known for being anti-establishment.
It was tough. Like, for example, if we want to perform a show, we have to write a list of songs to submit a form to the Ministry of Media to write down the lyrics and everything, so they have to read it and go through it to approve if you can do a show or not.
And did you actually have to write a song praising Saddam Hussein?
We did, yes. That was basically our, you know, like butter your way in kind of thing.
Despite this, restrictions were tight. In fact, even headbanging was banned because it resembled the movement Orthodox Jews make whilst praying.
Cruise missiles slammed into important government buildings in the center of the Iraqi capital.
Then, in 2003, as part of the so-called War on Terror, the Iraq invasion began.
Their mission? To remove Saddam Hussein from power and disarm Iraq of its weapons of mass destruction.
Things were about to get even more difficult for the band.
Yes, it was tough under Saddam, but it's gotten a lot tougher because before, you know, like you had one person that you were afraid of, but then after 2003, there was social chaos, insurgency, militants, and Saddam time were more worried about don't touch religion, don't touch politics. But now we went to another level, which is don't even perform. We got multiple threat letters, and we're gonna kill you, you devil worshippers and stuff like that. And honestly, I don't know if it's a flight or fight mode or whatever. We cared, you know, but we didn't care. Like, yes, it worries me, but 5 minutes later, you know what? If they're not gonna kill me, I'm gonna die either way. So I might as well just do what I want to do. I might as well just do what I want to do.
As the conflict continued, Akrasa Kauda struggled on. Despite the inherent dangers and losing many friends and family, they still managed to hold gigs in the embattled city of Baghdad.
3 suicide bombings, timed for maximum effect.
2003 to 2006, we did 2 shows. This show was like, you know, word of mouth. Both gigs, they were at the Fanar Hotel. We had like mortar attacks and explosions going around and, you know, people shooting in the air and stuff like that.
During a gig this was happening?
Yes, during the gig. Like, now I'm thinking of it, I'm like, how did I make it? But then there, at that point in time, it was just the nature of the beast. I mean, that's what I have to deal with on a daily basis.
But as determined as Akrasa Kauda were to keep playing, they had their limits. The band had featured in a documentary and had now become the target of religious extremists. The singer Waleed had left the group by this point. The West needed to leave Iraq. Their lives depended on it.
We were even on their militia list of targets. So 2006, I think towards the end of it, we ended up leaving. We went to Syria, me, Marwan, Tony, and Faisal. So at this point, we were like, okay, well, if we go back, we're dead. And we can't stay in Syria, so what can we do?
The band ended up crossing the border to Turkey before making it to America as refugees in 2009. There, their music was more important than ever.
Heavy metal was the best to deliver us. Now we're more focused on bringing the reality of the situation that's going on in Iraq to the world. Personally, I felt like I became some sort of like an ambassador, like a voice for the nation. You know what I mean?
After arriving in the States, the band would go on to record their first official album and tour the country, but not before meeting their idol Metallica and receiving a very special gift from lead singer James Hetfield. all just days after landing in the US as refugees.
And he was like, "What's up, guys? Like, we've known this dude for our first metal show in the US, and I'm in a VIP pit, and Metallica, and I get to meet them before the show, and it's just mind-blowing." And then Joe Hetfield comes off the stage with his guitar. He just literally took the guitar with the sweaty guitar strap and all that, and he was like, "Hey guys, keep writing new music to you." And then he writes, you know, "Welcome to the US." To me, that's it. I mean, that's it. I've done everything I want at that point in life, you know?
Firas Al-Latif was speaking to me, Johnny Ayanson, for Witness History for the BBC World Service. Crassic Cauda have since taken an indefinite hiatus and are working on different projects, including Firas's current band, Ghost Ball.
This is the BBC World Service, and on the food chain this week, is it possible to produce carbon-neutral meat? What does that even mean? I'm Grace Limstone, and I've been to an enormous cattle ranch in Uruguay to find out more about cows and climate change. The food chain at bbcworldservice.com/foodchain. In 30 minutes, heart and soul.
Father Pierre Bazil says that he was just 12 years of age when he knew he wanted to live a religious life. And today he's been living in a silent monastery for 45 years. Hear his story.
The newsroom is next. This is the BBC World Service, the world's radio station.
This is Alex Ritson with the newsroom. The White House tells Joe Biden's political opponents they won't be hearing audio recordings that led an official investigator to brand him an elderly man with a poor memory. Brazil considers constructing temporary cities as flooding in the south leaves hundreds of thousands homeless.
At a time when rivers have already burst their banks, water is already kind of filling the streets, and more than 500,000 people have been displaced from their homes, the weather isn't really relenting.
Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping vow to deepen military and economic ties as the Russian president visits China's little Moscow. England's Premier League football clubs are deciding whether they want to keep or scrap VAR. And found at last, the long-lost branch of the Nile used to flow past the pyramids.
There's no smoking gun instruction manual that says first you drag a stone here, and then you build a ramp, and then you drag it up the ramp and put it on top.
First, this news. Hello, I'm Chris Barrow with the BBC News. Israel is facing renewed calls from the United States to get more aid into Gaza. US officials said Israel and Egypt needed to make sure that the southern Rafah crossing is reopened as soon as possible. The two countries have blamed each other for its continued closure. The State Department spokesperson, Vedant Patel, said Washington was concerned that no fuel was entering the Gaza Strip via Rafah.
We are concerned that travel and the flow of fuel of aid into Gaza via Rafah has come to a complete halt, but we are continuing to work with the government of Egypt, with the government of Israel, to do everything we can to make sure that this gets open as soon as possible. There are, of course, legitimate security and operational concerns that are legitimate, and we're continuing to work through those processes.
Israel has complained that the UN's top court is being exploited by South Africa, which has called for an order to halt the Israeli offensive in Rafah. The Israeli Foreign Ministry said South Africa had presented biased and false claims that relied on Hamas sources. Israel's legal team will present its case to the International Court of Justice on Friday. The Biden administration has announced that it will end new leases for coal mining in the Powder River Basin, which produces nearly half of the United States coal. Elsa Orkney reports.
The region covers vast tracts of the western states of Montana and Wyoming. It won't affect current coal leases. Mining groups have called the move outrageous, saying it's a blow to energy security and to mining states and communities. But it's been praised by climate activists, who say it will safeguard the environment and significantly cut carbon emissions. The move comes as the United States continues its shift away from coal. President Biden sees it as a way of appealing to young people and progressive voters, while Donald Trump has promised to reverse the Democrats' green policies if he's elected.
Trade and economic cooperation is the theme of President Putin's second day of his visit to China. The Russia leader is in the northeastern city of Harbin, not far from the Russian border. The BBC's China correspondent, Stephen McDonnell, reports from Beijing.
The symbolism of a visit to a place where Chinese and Russian cultures meet is expected to be on full display. However, with the opening of a trade expo there, the real emphasis will be on economic links, as Russia's leader seeks greater backing for his war economy. The US State Department has this week criticized Beijing for supporting Vladimir Putin's invasion of Ukraine by rebuilding his country's defense industrial base. Washington has vowed to take what is described as appropriate action in...
Stephen McDonnell. This is the latest world news from the BBC. Officials in Canada say wind and rain have halted the advance of a wildfire threatening a town near the oil sands in the west of the country. The flames have forced nearly 7,000 residents of Fort McMurray in Alberta to evacuate their homes. The city was devastated by a wildfire 8 years ago. Flooding has worsened in parts of the Brazilian state of Rio Grande do Sul as water from swollen rivers and lakes threatens cities downstream. More than 150 people are now known to have died across the state. Over 500,000 have been displaced by the floods and landslides, which began nearly 3 weeks ago. Officials in Russia's Belgorod region say a woman and her 4-year-old son have been killed in a Ukrainian drone strike. Over the border in Ukraine, several Russian drones struck Kharkiv, as our defense correspondent Jonathan Beale reports from the city.
Kharkiv has been a regular target of Russian drones and missile strikes, but these latest attacks were more intense and followed a visit by President Zelensky. He traveled to the city earlier in the day to be briefed on the latest military situation, with fighting ongoing near the border with Russia. Tonight, the hum of drones could be heard over the city. From the ground, there was the occasional burst of machine gun fire and tracer rounds trying to bring them down. A few were intercepted, but there were also loud explosions.
The Prime Minister of Senegal, Ousmane Sonko, has raised the possibility of closing French military bases in the country. Speaking at a conference in Dakar, he asked why Senegal still had several French bases more than 60 years after independence from France. Mr. Sonko promised to strengthen ties with Mali, Burkina Faso and Niger, who have pushed out French troops and turned to Russia for help in fighting jihadist insurgencies. Mr. Sonko questioned the impact of the French military presence on the country's sovereignty. That's the latest BBC News.
Hello, this is Alex Ritson with the newsroom. Joe Biden is blocking the release of audio recordings of his interviews with the official investigator who in February branded him an elderly man with a poor memory. Special counsel Robert Hare caused a political firestorm with a claim in his report that the president's handling of classified documents. Republicans are keen to depict Mr. Biden as being too doddery to hold office. I asked our correspondent in Washington, Will Vernon, if we know what's in these audio recordings.
We know most of what they contain because we've already had the transcripts. They show the conversations that Joe Biden had with investigators. Conversations in which, according to the report, Mr. Biden failed to remember key dates, including when he became vice president, and most humiliating of all, when his son died. So that report, whilst it more or less exonerated Mr. Biden legally, because it recommended no charges be brought against him, right, for handling classified documents, politically it was very damaging indeed, because it came around the same time that Mr. Biden made a series of embarrassing slip-ups, confusing the names of world leaders and countries, slurring his words. Bear in mind that even before that, over 70% of Americans thought that Mr. Biden is too old to be president. The report's language just couldn't have been worse. And Mr. Biden said that the conversations that he had with the Justice Department as part of that investigation were misrepresented in the report. But then fast forward to now, when they're about to be released, the White House blocks them, right? So that's led some people to accuse the White House of double standards. If, you know, Mr. Biden was misrepresented, and he's not a forgetful old man, then kind of show us the tapes. Now, the official line from the White House, from the Justice Department, is that the audio in these tapes is sensitive, it relates to law enforcement, and that if they were released, they'd be kind of chopped up and stitched together and used in kind of dirty political stunts and ads by the Republicans.
And he's using executive privilege to prevent their release. What does that mean and how does that work?
Executive privilege is kind of like a special pass that the president has to withhold information from the American public, and the use of it was recommended for these tapes by the Attorney General Merrick Garland. And because of that, a little earlier this evening, a congressional committee voted to advance a measure that would hold Mr. Garland in contempt of Congress. That's a bit like contempt of court. Now, that motion isn't binding, Alex, but there needs to be a full vote of the House for that. But it is still significant because it's part of an ongoing battle, a war, really, between the Justice Department, the DOJ, and Republicans in the Congress. They have accused Mr. Garland of withholding the tapes for political reasons to protect the president. Now, it's a bit of a grey area whether the Attorney General